The day I walked away from everything, my mother was too busy planning my sister's engagement party in what she thought was her house. The same house I'd secretly purchased 3 years earlier. The same house where I'd grown up feeling like a stranger in my own family. As I stood in the doorway watching Mom hang decorations for Madison's big day, she didn't even notice me there. Just like she hadn't noticed me for the past 25 years. "Elena, make yourself useful and help your sister with the catering setup," she called out, without even looking up from the banner she was hanging that read, "Congratulations, Madison and Ryan." Ryan. My ex-boyfriend of 4 years. The same Ryan who'd proposed to Madison just 6 months after our breakup. I should have felt heartbroken. Instead, I felt nothing but cold satisfaction as I pulled out my phone and made the call I'd been planning for months. "Hello, Peterson Property Management? This is Elena Hartwell. I need you to serve an eviction notice to the current tenants at 1247 Maple Ridge Drive. Yes, effective immediately. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss." The Hartwell family had always been picture perfect from the outside. Mom, Patricia Hartwell, worked as a bank manager and prided herself on maintaining appearances. Dad, Michael, was a successful insurance broker who traveled frequently for work. We lived in the affluent suburb of Westfield Heights, where every lawn was manicured and every family seemed to have their lives perfectly together. But inside our pristine colonial house, things were different. Madison had always been the golden child. 3 years younger than me, naturally charismatic, effortlessly beautiful with her long blonde hair and bright blue eyes. Where I was quiet and studious, Madison was social and outgoing. Where I preferred reading in my room, Madison was the life of every party. The favoritism started early, but I didn't recognize it as a child. I thought it was normal for parents to light up differently when one child walked into the room. I thought every family had one child who got the bigger bedroom, the newer clothes, the first choice at everything. When I was 12 and Madison was 9, we both wanted to take piano lessons. There was only enough in the budget for one child, Mom explained. Madison got the lessons because she has such natural musical talent. I never found out how Mom determined this, since neither of us had ever touched a piano. When I was 16 and Madison was 13, we both applied for the same summer camp. It was an expensive leadership camp that only accepted 50 kids nationwide. I'd worked all year to save money for the application fee and had written my essay draft 12 times. Madison decided she wanted to go 3 days before the deadline and threw together an application in one evening. We both got accepted, only one of us got to go. "Madison is younger," Mom explained as she drove my sister to the airport. "She needs these opportunities more than you do. You're already so independent, Elena. You'll be fine." I spent that summer working at the local grocery store, bagging groceries and pushing shopping carts in the blazing heat while Madison posted Instagram photos from mountain hiking trips and leadership workshops. College selection followed the same pattern. I'd dreamed of attending Northwestern University since I was 14. I'd maintained a 4.2 GPA throughout high school, participated in debate team, volunteered at the animal shelter every weekend, and worked part-time to save money for application fees. Northwestern had always been my dream school. Their business program was ranked 3rd in the nation. Madison, despite her average grades and minimal extracurricular activities, announced during her junior year that she also wanted to attend Northwestern, not because she'd researched their programs or had any particular academic interest, but because it would be so fun to be at the same school as Elena. When the acceptance letters arrived, we'd both gotten in. But Northwestern was expensive, and while I'd qualified for partial academic scholarships, it still wasn't enough to cover everything for both of us. The family meeting happened on a Tuesday evening in March. Dad sat at the head of our dining room table with financial documents spread out in front of him. Mom sat to his right, already looking apologetic. Madison lounged in her chair, painting her nails bright pink and occasionally glancing up with that confident smile that never wavered. "We need to talk about college expenses," Dad began, adjusting his glasses. "Northwestern is a significant investment, and we want to make sure we're making the best decision for the family." I felt my stomach drop before he even continued. "Elena, you're incredibly bright and self-sufficient. You'll excel wherever you go. There are plenty of excellent state schools that would be lucky to have you." But Northwestern has the business program I've been preparing for since freshman year, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I've already been accepted to their honors track. Mom reached across the table and patted my hand. Sweetheart, you're so capable. You'll make any program work for you. Madison, on the other hand, needs the smaller class sizes and more personalized attention that Northwestern offers. Her learning style is different. Madison looked up from her nails and gave me a sympathetic smile that didn't reach her eyes. I'm sorry, Elena. If it makes you feel better, I promise to send you lots of pictures from campus. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling something fundamental shift inside me. For the first time, I understood that this wasn't about what was fair or what I'd earned. This was about who my parents valued more, and that person would never be me. I ended up at State University on a full academic scholarship, majoring in business administration, with a minor in real estate development. While Madison posted sorority photos and spring break vacation pictures from Northwestern, I worked 3 part-time jobs and graduated summa cum laude in 3.5 years. During my junior year, I started a small property management company with my roommate, Jessica Chen. We began by managing rental properties for other students' parents, taking a small percentage for handling maintenance, tenant relations, and rent collection. Jessica handled the marketing and client relations while I managed the finances and legal aspects. The business grew faster than we'd anticipated. By the time I graduated, we were managing over 200 rental properties across 3 counties. I'd learned everything about real estate law, property values, market trends, and investment strategies. But the real turning point came during my senior year, when Jessica's uncle, a successful real estate developer, offered to mentor me. David Chen had built a small empire of commercial and residential properties throughout the Midwest. He saw potential in my analytical mind and relentless work ethic. Elena, he told me over coffee one afternoon, you have something most people in this business lack. You understand that real estate isn't just about properties. It's about people's lives, their dreams, their security. But you also don't let emotions cloud your business judgment. Under David's guidance, I learned about property flipping, commercial development, and investment strategies that most people my age never even heard about. He introduced me to contractors, architects, city planners, and other investors. By the time I was 22, I was making more money than my parents combined. Meanwhile, Madison was struggling through Northwestern, changing her major 3 times and barely maintaining the GPA required to keep her scholarship. But every family gathering, every holiday dinner, every phone call home centered around Madison's latest drama or achievement. When she finally graduated with a degree in communications and no clear career plan, Mom and Dad threw her a massive graduation party at the country club. When I'd graduated summa cum laude and immediately landed a position with a major development firm, I got a dinner at Applebee's and a card that said, "Congratulations, graduate," with a generic message inside. The final straw came when Madison started dating Ryan. Ryan Morrison had been my boyfriend since sophomore year of college. We'd met in a business ethics class, and I'd been immediately drawn to his ambition and intelligence. He was studying finance with plans to work in investment banking. We spent hours talking about our career goals, our dreams of financial independence, our plans for the future. Ryan knew about my family dynamics. He'd witnessed enough family gatherings to understand how I was treated compared to Madison. He'd been the one to comfort me after particularly painful family interactions, the one who reminded me that their inability to see my worth didn't diminish my value. Or so I thought. The relationship ended abruptly during my first year working at Morrison & Associates Development. I'd been putting in 60-hour weeks, learning the business from the ground up, and admittedly hadn't been as available as usual. Ryan claimed he needed someone who could prioritize the relationship, someone who was more present and engaged. 3 weeks later, Madison posted a photo on Instagram of herself and Ryan at some trendy downtown restaurant, her hand strategically positioned to show off a promise ring. The caption read, "Sometimes the best things come when you least expect them. So grateful for this amazing man who sees me for who I really am." Within 6 months, they were engaged. Mom called me personally to share the wonderful news and to ask if I would help plan the engagement party. "I know this might be awkward for you, sweetheart," she said in that patronizing tone she'd perfected over the years, "but Madison would love to have your support. And honestly, you're so good at organizing things, you could really help make this special for her." I agreed to help, but not for the reasons she thought. Because by then, I'd already made the purchase that would change everything. 3 years earlier, shortly after starting my job at Morrison & Associates, I'd learned something interesting about our family's financial situation. Dad's insurance business, while successful on the surface, had been struggling for years. He'd made some poor investment decisions and had been quietly refinancing the house multiple times to cover business expenses and maintain their lifestyle. When the bank inevitably foreclosed, I was ready. I purchased 1247 Maple Ridge Drive through a shell company for $850,000, significantly below market value due to the foreclosure circumstances. Then I had Peterson Property Management offer to rent it back to my parents at below market rates, with a lease that gave them the impression of long-term stability. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. For 3 years, my parents had been living in my house, paying me rent without knowing it, while continuing to treat me like an afterthought in their own family narrative. And now, as I watched Mom hang decorations for Madison's engagement party in my living room, I realized it was finally time for them to learn the truth. The weeks following my call to Peterson Property Management unfolded like watching a house of cards collapse in slow motion. I didn't stick around to witness the immediate aftermath of the eviction notice. I had a business to run and a life to live that didn't revolve around my family's drama. My company, Hartwell Properties, had grown into a multi-million-dollar operation with over 800 rental units across 4 states. What had started as a college side hustle with Jessica was now a full-scale real estate empire. We'd expanded into commercial properties, luxury condos, and even started our own construction division. Jessica had moved to Austin to handle our Texas operations, leaving me to manage the Midwest headquarters from my penthouse office in downtown Chicago. The space was everything I'd dreamed of during those grocery store summers. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan, a conference room that could seat 20, and my own private elevator. But success, I was learning, could be lonely. 3 days after the eviction notice was served, my phone started ringing. First Dad, then Mom, then Madison. I let every call go to voicemail. Dad's message was predictably businesslike. "Elena, there's been some kind of mistake with our rental agreement. Could you call me back so we can discuss this situation? I'm sure it's just a paperwork error." Mom's voicemail was more emotional. "Honey, I don't understand what's happening. The property management company says we have 30 days to vacate, but this is our home. Could you maybe use some of your real estate connections to help us figure this out? We really need your expertise right now." It was the first time in 25 years that Mom had acknowledged I might have expertise worth needing. Madison's message was the most revealing. "Elena, this is seriously messing up my engagement party. Can't you, call in some favors or something? You know people in real estate, right? I know we haven't talked much lately, but I really need my big sister right now." My big sister. The phrase would have meant everything to me 5 years ago. Now it just sounded hollow and desperate. I deleted all 3 messages without responding. Instead, I threw myself into a new acquisition deal, a historic building downtown, that we planned to convert into luxury lofts. The project required intricate negotiations with the City Planning Commission, architectural consultations, and environmental impact studies. It was the kind of complex, high-stakes deal that demanded my complete attention. But even with 18-hour workdays, I couldn't escape the constant buzzing of my phone. The calls escalated. Dad started calling twice a day. Mom left increasingly frantic voicemails. Madison began texting me every few hours with updates on their situation. "Elena, please call me back. The lawyer says the eviction is legitimate and we really do have to move." "Elena, Mom is crying every day. She doesn't understand how this happened." "Elena, I know you're busy with work, but this is a family emergency." "Elena, Ryan thinks maybe you could help us find a new place since you know the market so well." That last text made me laugh out loud. Ryan thought I could help them. The same Ryan who'd broken up with me because I wasn't present and engaged enough, who'd started dating my sister 3 weeks later, who was now planning to marry her in the house I owned. The irony was almost too perfect. 2 weeks into their 30-day notice period, I finally received the call I'd been expecting. But it wasn't from my family. It was from Marcus Thompson, the real estate attorney who'd handled the original property purchase. Elena, I've got some interesting news, Marcus said during our weekly check-in call. Your parents' attorney reached out to my office yesterday. Did they figure it out? Not exactly. They're trying to trace the ownership of the property to see if they can negotiate directly with the owner. They hired Peterson and Associates, ironically the same firm that's handling the eviction, to do a property title search. I leaned back in my office chair, watching the afternoon sun reflect off the lake 40 floors below. How long before they connect the dots? With the shell company structure we set up, could be weeks, could be months, depends how deep they dig and how much they're willing to spend on legal fees. And if they do trace it back to me? Marcus chuckled. Then you'll have some explaining to do, but legally you're in the clear. You own the property free and clear, the foreclosure was legitimate, and the eviction notice is valid. They have no legal recourse. After I hung up, I found myself thinking about the last time I'd seen Ryan before he'd started dating Madison. We'd been at a coffee shop near Northwestern's campus, where he was finishing his MBA. I'd driven down from Chicago to surprise him with tickets to a Cubs game, something we'd talked about doing all summer but never found time for. He'd seemed distracted, checking his phone every few minutes and giving me half-hearted responses to my attempts at conversation. When I'd presented the tickets, he'd barely looked at them. I can't go, he'd said, not meeting my eyes. I've got plans with some classmates this weekend. What plans? You didn't mention anything when we talked yesterday. It's a study group for Professor Williams' advanced portfolio management class. I believed him then. I'd even felt guilty for not being more supportive of his academic commitments. Looking back, I realized he'd probably already been seeing Madison behind my back. The Cubs tickets were still in my desk drawer, a $300 reminder of how naive I'd been about people's capacity for betrayal. My assistant, Carol, knocked on my office door around 6 that evening. Elena, there's a woman here to see you. Says she's your mother? I looked up from the construction contracts I'd been reviewing. My mother is here? In the building? She's in the lobby. Security called up because she doesn't have an appointment, but she's been waiting for over an hour. She seems upset. I could have had security escort her out. I could have told Carol to inform her that I was in meetings for the rest of the evening. Instead, I heard myself saying, "Send her up." Patricia Hartwell at 62 was still an attractive woman, but the stress of the past 2 weeks had taken its toll. Her usually perfect blonde bob looked disheveled, and her makeup couldn't quite hide the dark circles under her eyes. She was wearing the navy blue suit she always wore to important bank meetings, her armor for difficult conversations. "Elena," she said as she entered my office, her voice carefully controlled, "thank you for seeing me. Have a seat, Mom." She perched on the edge of the leather chair across from my desk, clutching her purse like a lifeline. For a moment, neither of us spoke. She looked around the office, taking in the expensive furniture, the view, the awards and certificates covering one wall. "I had no idea," she finally said. "About all this. About what you've built." "Why would you? You never asked." She flinched at the directness of my response. "Elena, I know things haven't always been perfect between us, but we're family, and right now, our family needs help." "What kind of help?" "We're going to lose the house. I don't understand how it happened, but the bank foreclosed 2 years ago and someone bought it as an investment property. Now they want us out." Her voice cracked slightly. "That house is the only home Madison has ever known. All her memories are there. Her engagement party is supposed to be there next weekend." I leaned forward, studying her face. "What about my memories, Mom? Weren't they worth preserving too?" "Of course they were. You both grew up in that house." "No, we didn't. Madison grew up in that house. I just happened to live there." Mom's composure finally cracked. "Elena, please. I know I wasn't perfect, but I did my best. Raising 2 daughters was challenging, and maybe I made mistakes, but I loved you both. You loved us differently." "That's not true." "Mom, when I graduated summa cum laude from State, you missed my graduation ceremony because Madison had a sorority function the same weekend." She opened her mouth to protest, then closed it. "When I got my first promotion at Morrison & Associates, you forgot to call and congratulate me for 3 weeks. But when Madison got a part-time job at a boutique, you posted about it on Facebook like she'd won a Nobel Prize. Elena, when I bought my first rental property at 23, you told me it was risky and impractical. When Madison spent her entire trust fund on a car she couldn't afford, you helped her refinance it. Mom was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. I don't know what you want me to say. I want you to be honest. For once in 25 years, I want you to be honest about why you treated us differently. She was quiet for so long I thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Madison was easier to love. The words hung in the air between us like a physical presence. She was sunny and social and uncomplicated. You were… She searched for the right words. You were so intense, even as a little girl, so serious and determined. You didn't seem to need the same kind of attention and validation that Madison did. So you decided I didn't deserve it? I thought you were strong enough to handle less attention. I thought Madison needed more support because she was more fragile. And now? Mom looked around my office again. The success I'd built without their help, without their encouragement, sometimes in spite of their discouragement. Now I realize I may have been wrong about who was actually fragile. It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever received from her, and it should have felt like vindication. Instead, it just felt hollow. I need you to help us find a new place, she continued, with your connections, your knowledge of the market. We can't afford much, but maybe you know of something reasonable. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the growing darkness. Actually, Mom, there's something I need to tell you about your housing situation. The silence in my office stretched for what felt like an eternity. Mom sat frozen in her chair, still clutching her purse, mascara stains marking her cheeks like battle scars. Outside, the city hummed with evening traffic, but inside this glass tower, the only sound was the quiet hum of the air conditioning and my mother's shallow breathing. What do you need to tell me? She finally whispered. I turned away from the window and walked back to my desk, opening the bottom drawer where I kept a locked file box. Inside were all the documents related to the Maple Ridge property, the foreclosure notices, the purchase agreement, the shell company formation papers, the rental agreements. 3 years of carefully orchestrated secrecy contained in one manila folder. The owner of 1247 Maple Ridge Drive, I said, placing the folder on my desk, isn't some faceless investment company. Mom's eyes fixed on the folder like it might explode. Elena, what are you saying? I'm saying that for the past 3 years, you've been paying rent to me. The color drained from her face so quickly I thought she might faint. She gripped the arms of her chair, her knuckles turning white. That's impossible. I opened the folder and pulled out the deed, sliding it across the desk toward her. Hartwell Holdings, LLC, incorporated in Delaware, sole owner Elena Marie Hartwell. I bought the house at a foreclosure auction for $850,000. Below market value, cash purchase. She stared at the document without picking it up, as if touching it would make it more real. You own our house? I own your house. There's a difference. But how did you even know it was in foreclosure? We never told anyone about the financial problems. I sat back down, studying her face. Even in shock, she was still trying to maintain some semblance of control over the narrative. Mom, I work in real estate. Foreclosure notices are public record. I've had a Google alert set up for Dad's name since I started my business, just to keep track of any legal issues that might affect family finances. You've been spying on us? I've been protecting myself. There's a difference. She finally picked up the deed, her hands trembling as she read through the legal language. 3 years ago. That was right after Madison graduated from Northwestern. Right after you spent her entire college fund and then some. Right after you refinanced the house for the 3rd time to cover Dad's business losses. Right after you realized that maintaining appearances was more expensive than you could afford. Mom set the deed down carefully, as if it might shatter. Why didn't you tell us? Tell you what? That I was successful enough to buy the house you were losing? That I could have helped you avoid foreclosure entirely if you'd ever bothered to ask? That your failure daughter was actually the most financially stable person in the family? Elena, that's not fair. Fair? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Mom, let me tell you what's not fair. What's not fair is working 3 jobs in college, while Madison got a full ride because she was, quote, more social. What's not fair is building a multi-million-dollar business and having your own mother not even know what you do for a living. What's not fair is finding out your boyfriend is dating your sister through an Instagram post. She winced at that last part. We didn't know how to tell you about Ryan and Madison. We thought it might be awkward. Awkward, I repeated the word slowly. You thought it might be awkward. Not devastating, not betraying, not completely inappropriate. Awkward. Ryan said you two had grown apart naturally. He said the breakup was mutual. Ryan lied. But that's what Ryan does. He tells people what they want to hear. Mom was quiet for a long moment, absorbing the implications. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller, more fragile than I'd ever heard it. What happens now? That depends. On what? On whether you want to hear the rest of the story. She nodded, though she looked like she was bracing for physical impact. I pulled out another document from the folder, the rental agreement that Peterson Property Management had signed with my parents 3 years ago. When I bought the house, I had 2 options. I could have evicted you immediately and sold it for market value, which would have netted me about $400,000 in profit. Or I could have kept it as a rental property and let you stay. Why did you let us stay? Because despite everything, I'm not cruel. I knew that losing the house would have destroyed Dad's remaining business reputation. I knew Mom would have had to explain to her country club friends why she was suddenly living in a 2-bedroom apartment. I knew Madison would have had to cancel her elaborate engagement party. She looked up sharply at that. You knew about the engagement party? Mom, Madison posts everything on social media. I've watched her plan this party for months. The Instagram stories about dress shopping, the Pinterest boards for decorations, the vendor meetings. It's like following a reality show about my own family's life. Then why are you evicting us now? Why not wait until after the party? This was the question I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. The answer would reveal more about my motivations than I was entirely comfortable with, even to myself. Because 3 weeks ago, I went to dinner with my business partner, Jessica, when she was in town. We went to Salvatore's, that Italian place downtown where Ryan and I used to go for special occasions. Mom nodded, recognizing the restaurant. Madison and Ryan were there, at our table, our usual table that I'd been going to for 4 years. They didn't see me, but I saw them. I paused, remembering the moment with perfect clarity. Ryan was showing her the ring he was planning to propose with. A 2-carat solitaire that looked exactly like the one we'd looked at together when we talked about getting engaged. Elena? But that's not the part that broke me, Mom. The part that broke me was listening to them talk about their future. About the house they wanted to buy after they got married. About how convenient it was that they could live rent-free in, quote, the family house, while they saved up for a down payment. Mom's face went completely white. Oh no! Oh yes, Ryan was bragging about how smart Madison was for having parents who owned their house outright. How lucky they were to have a free place to live while they established their careers. How they could probably stay there for years without any real expenses. I stood up again, needing to move while I told this part of the story. Do you know what Madison said in response? She said the best part is that Elena is so focused on her little real estate thing that she'll never be successful enough to afford a house like this. We'll probably inherit it eventually anyway. The words hung in the air like poison gas. Mom covered her face with her hands. Her little real estate thing, Mom. The business that I built from nothing, that now employs 47 people, generated $12 million in revenue last year, her little real estate thing. Elena, she didn't mean. She meant every word. And Ryan laughed. He actually laughed and said, Elena always was more ambitious than realistic. Mom was crying again, but these weren't the controlled tears from earlier. These were the ugly, devastating tears of someone whose world was collapsing in real time. That's when I realized that letting you stay in the house wasn't kindness, it was enabling. I was subsidizing Madison's delusion that she was entitled to a lifestyle she hadn't earned, with a man who had betrayed me, in a house that I had paid for. I walked back to the desk and pulled out the final document, the eviction notice that had started this whole confrontation. So I called Peterson Property Management and instructed them to begin eviction proceedings. No more subsidizing, no more enabling, no more pretending that we're a normal family where everyone gets what they need. Mom looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. What do you want from us? I want you to acknowledge reality. I want you to stop pretending that Madison is fragile and needs protection while I'm strong and don't need support. I want you to admit that you chose her over me every single time, and that choice had consequences. And if we do that, if we acknowledge everything you're saying, then we figure out what comes next. She wiped her eyes with a tissue from her purse, trying to compose herself. Elena, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Go ahead. Is this about justice or is this about revenge? It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself for weeks. The honest answer was complicated. Maybe both, I said finally. Maybe they're the same thing. Mom nodded slowly, as if this answer made more sense to her than any platitude about forgiveness would have. I need to go home and tell your father and Madison the truth. All of it? All of it. She stood up, gathering her purse and what remained of her dignity. At the door, she turned back to me. Elena, for what it's worth, I am proud of what you've accomplished. I know I never said it, but I am. Thank you for saying that. And I'm sorry. For all of it. For choosing wrong, for not seeing what was right in front of me, for letting you think you weren't valuable to us. It was the apology I'd been waiting 25 years to hear. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it just felt like the end of something that had been broken for so long, neither of us remembered what it looked like when it was whole. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I drove to my lake house in Michigan, a property I'd purchased 2 years earlier as a weekend retreat but rarely had time to visit. The 3-hour drive gave me space to think, to process what had just happened, and to prepare for whatever would come next. The lake house was everything my childhood home wasn't. Peaceful, uncluttered, mine. I'd designed it myself, working with architects to create something that reflected my actual taste, rather than anyone's expectations. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the lake. A modern kitchen where I actually cooked. A library filled with books I'd chosen myself. I spent the weekend walking the shoreline, reading contracts for upcoming developments, and ignoring my phone. By Sunday evening, I had 43 missed calls and over 100 text messages. I scrolled through them while sitting on my deck with a glass of wine, watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of gold and crimson. Most were from Madison, and they told the story of the weekend's events more clearly than any novel could have. Saturday, 2:47 p.m. Elena, what the hell? Mom came home crying and now she won't stop talking about some business you have. Saturday, 3:15 p.m. Call me back right now. Mom says you own our house? That's impossible. Saturday, 4:33 p.m. Elena, this isn't funny. My engagement party is next weekend. Whatever game you're playing needs to stop. Saturday, 6:58 p.m. Ryan is here, and we're trying to make sense of what Mom is saying. She keeps talking about shell companies and foreclosures. Are you seriously trying to kick us out? Saturday, 9:42 p.m. Dad spent 3 hours going through old papers and bank statements. He found the foreclosure notices. Elena, how could you not tell us you were successful enough to help? How could you just watch us lose everything? Sunday, 7:23 a.m. I couldn't sleep all night. I keep thinking about what Mom said, about the restaurant. Elena, I was joking about your business. I didn't mean anything by it. Sunday, 10:15 a.m. Ryan thinks we should drive to Chicago and talk to you in person. Please don't make us do that. Just call me back. Sunday, 2:08 p.m. Elena, I'm begging you. I know we haven't been close, but we're sisters. You can't really want to destroy my engagement party. Sunday, 7:45 p.m. Fine, don't call me back. But this isn't over. We'll figure this out without you, just like we always have. That last message made me smile, just like we always have. As if Madison had ever figured out anything more complicated than which filter made her look best on Instagram. Dad's messages were characteristically brief and businesslike. Saturday, 8:15 p.m. Elena, we need to discuss this situation as a family. Please call me. Sunday, 11:30 a.m. Elena, I've reviewed the documents. I understand what you did and why. We should talk. Sunday, 6 p.m. Elena, whatever your mother and Madison may have done, this affects me too. I deserve a conversation. Mom's messages were the most painful to read. Saturday, 10:30 p.m. Elena, I told them everything we discussed. Madison is devastated. Your father is trying to understand. I think I made things worse. Sunday, 9 a.m. I keep thinking about our conversation, about all the times I chose wrong. I don't know how to fix this. Sunday, 4:20 p.m. Your father wants to hire a lawyer. I told him that won't help. This isn't a legal problem. This is a family problem. Sunday, 8:30 p.m. Elena, please come home. We need to face this together. The word home, in that last message, hit harder than I'd expected, because 1247 Maple Ridge Drive had never really felt like home to me. It had just been the place where I lived until I was old enough to leave. Home was this lake house, where nobody judged my choices or compared me to anyone else. Monday morning, I drove back to Chicago with a clearer head and a definite plan. Whatever conversation was coming with my family, it would happen on my terms, in my space, with my rules. I made it through exactly 4 hours of meetings before Carol buzzed my intercom. Elena, there are 3 people here to see you. They say they're your family, and they're not taking no for an answer. I looked out my office window at the lake, gathering my composure. Send them up. They walked into my office like they were entering a courtroom. Dad in his best suit, looking older than his 64 years. Mom still wearing yesterday's clothes, her eyes red and puffy. And Madison, dressed in designer jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than most people made in a week. Elena, Dad said, extending his hand as if we were meeting for the first time. Thank you for seeing us. I shook his hand, noting how his grip felt weaker than I remembered. Have a seat. They arranged themselves in the chairs across from my desk, the same formation as a business meeting. Madison kept looking around the office with undisguised amazement, as if she was seeing it for the first time. Which, I realized, she was. So, I said, settling back in my chair, I assume Mom filled you in on our conversation Friday night. Dad nodded. She did. And I spent the weekend verifying the information. He pulled out a manila folder of his own. I found the foreclosure notices that I'd hidden from your mother. I reviewed our bank statements from the past 3 years. I confirmed the rental payments we've been making to Peterson Property Management. And I owe you an apology. Several apologies, actually. This wasn't what I'd expected. Dad had always been proud, sometimes to a fault. Admitting mistakes didn't come naturally to him. I'm listening. First, I should have told you about the financial problems. You're my daughter, and you had a right to know that we were at risk of losing the house. Why didn't you? He was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. Because I was ashamed. Because I didn't want you to think I was a failure as a provider. And because... He glanced at Madison, then back at me. Because I assumed you wouldn't be in a position to help anyway. Madison shifted uncomfortably in her chair. This was clearly not going the way she'd expected. What changed your mind? I asked. Saturday night, after I finished going through all the financial documents, I did something I should have done years ago. I researched your company. He pulled a printed article from his folder, a feature from Commercial Real Estate Weekly about successful young entrepreneurs in the Midwest. My photo was prominently displayed above the headline, Elena Hartwell, building an empire one property at a time. $12 million in annual revenue, he read aloud. 47 employees across 4 states. Featured in Forbes' quote, 30 under 30 feet list for real estate development. Winner of the Chicago Business Journal's Young Executive of the Year award. Madison's mouth had fallen open. Forbes? You were in Forbes? 2 years ago, I said simply. Elena, Dad continued, I had no idea. I mean, I knew you worked in real estate, but I assumed. You assumed it was a small-time operation, maybe property management for college apartments. Yes, he admitted. And that assumption was completely unfair and uninformed. Mom spoke up for the first time. We all made assumptions. We all failed to really see what Elena had accomplished. Madison finally found her voice. Elena, I had no idea you were so successful. When I said that stuff at the restaurant, I wasn't trying to be mean, I just didn't know. Madison, I said, turning to face her directly, ignorance isn't an excuse for cruelty. You didn't know about my business because you never asked. In 5 years, you've never once inquired about my career, my goals, my life outside of this family. That's not true. When was the last time you called me just to talk? Not because you needed something, not because Mom told you to, but because you were genuinely interested in my life? She opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again. When was the last time you asked about my work, my relationships, my plans for the future? Silence. When was the last time you treated me like a sister instead of like an obligation? Madison's eyes filled with tears. Elena, I'm sorry. I know I've been selfish. You've been more than selfish, Madison. You've been actively dismissive. Every family gathering, every holiday, every conversation we've had for the past 5 years has revolved around your life, your problems, your achievements. And when I tried to share anything about my own life, you either changed the subject or made it about yourself. I didn't realize. You didn't realize because you didn't want to realize. It was easier to see me as the boring, responsible sister who didn't need attention or support. It was more convenient to maintain the family dynamic where you were the star and I was the supporting character. Dad cleared his throat. Elena, we all contributed to that dynamic. Your mother and I are equally responsible. I know, but Madison is 25 years old. At some point, she became responsible for her own choices. Madison was crying now, but they weren't the performative tears I'd seen so many times before. These looked genuine, raw, devastating. What do you want from us? She whispered. I want you to understand the consequences, I said. I want you to realize that actions have repercussions, that people have limits, that you can't treat someone badly for years and then expect them to rescue you when it's convenient. So you're really going to evict us? You're really going to destroy my engagement party? Madison, I'm not destroying anything. I'm simply no longer subsidizing your life. She looked around the office desperately, as if the answer to her problems might be written on the walls. What if we paid you back? For the rent? For everything? With what money? Ryan has a good job. Ryan has an entry-level position at a mid-tier investment firm. He makes maybe $60,000 a year before taxes. We could get a loan. Based on what collateral, what income history, what credit score? She deflated visibly, realizing that her usual solutions, asking for help, making promises, relying on family support, weren't going to work this time. Elena, Dad said quietly, what would it take for us to make this right? It was the question I'd been dreading, because the honest answer was complicated and painful for everyone involved. I don't know if you can make it right, Dad, but you could start by making it real. The silence that followed my words stretched across the office like a chasm. Dad sat forward in his chair, his hands clasped tightly together. Mom stared at her lap, while Madison looked between all of us as if waiting for someone to explain what making it real meant. What does that mean exactly? Dad finally asked. I stood up and walked to the whiteboard I used for project planning. In neat, precise handwriting, I wrote 3 words: truth, accountability, change. It means we stop pretending, I said, turning to face them. It means we acknowledge what actually happened in our family, not the sanitized version you've been telling yourselves for 25 years. I pointed to the first word. Truth means admitting that you systematically favored Madison over me. Not because she needed more help, not because I was stronger, but because you found her easier to love and more pleasant to be around. Mom winced, but nodded. Truth means acknowledging that you missed or dismissed every major milestone in my life, while celebrating Madison's smallest achievements. My high school graduation speech is valedictorian. You were late because Madison had a tennis match. My college graduation summa cum laude. You attended but spent the dinner talking about Madison's internship application. My first major business acquisition, you forgot I told you about it. Elena, Madison started. I'm not finished. I moved to the second word. Accountability means taking responsibility for the consequences of those choices. It means understanding that when you treat someone as less important for their entire life, You don't get to be surprised when they stop expecting importance from you. I looked directly at Madison. It means acknowledging that your comment about my little real estate thing wasn't a joke or a mistake. It was the natural result of 25 years of being taught that my accomplishments don't matter as much as yours. Madison's face crumpled, but she nodded through her tears. And change, I said, pointing to the third word, means demonstrating that you understand the first 2 points through your actions, not just your words. Dad leaned back in his chair. What kind of actions? I returned to my desk and pulled out a legal pad, where I'd been making notes during our conversation. I've been thinking about this since Friday night. If you want to stay in the house, my house, beyond the eviction date, here are my terms. The room went completely silent. Even Madison stopped crying. First, you pay market rate rent, no more subsidized housing. The current market rate for a 4-bedroom colonial in Westfield Heights is $4,200 per month. Dad's face went pale. Elena, we can't afford. Then you can't afford to live there. This is what I mean by making it real. You've been living in a house worth $1.2 million while paying $1,800 in rent. That ends now. Madison looked stricken. But that means we'd have to move anyway. Ryan and I can't afford that kind of rent on our salaries. Then maybe you should have thought about that before planning an elaborate lifestyle based on free housing. Elena, Mom said quietly, what's the point of charging us market rate if you know we can't pay it? The point is acknowledging reality. The point is understanding that the life you've been living for the past 3 years wasn't sustainable and wasn't actually yours. I moved to the next item on my list. Second, Madison cancels the engagement party. What? Madison shot up from her chair. Elena, no. I've already sent invitations, booked vendors, ordered flowers. She's not just lying to me, she's committing fraud, using the name of a legitimate business to obtain credit and services. The restaurant contract isn't delayed or pending. It never existed. She's been impersonating a client relationship to justify her lies and potentially breaking federal laws in the process. I forward the email to my personal account and add it to my evidence folder. Then I sit back in my chair, staring out at the Seattle skyline, trying to process the magnitude of what I've uncovered. Madison isn't a struggling artist making questionable financial decisions. She's a systematic con artist who's been running elaborate scams while using me as her primary funding source. Every conversation we've had about her work, her clients, her future, all of it has been fiction, designed to maintain my financial support. My phone rings. Madison's name on the caller ID. I let it go to voicemail, but she calls back immediately, then again. On the 4th call, I answered. Alice, thank God. I've been trying to reach you. Her voice is tight with panic. Something happened to my bank account. Some kind of mix-up with direct deposits. I know this is terrible timing, but I need to ask for help again. The audacity is breathtaking. She's gotten the same email I have, realized her fraud is being discovered, and her first instinct is to call me for more money. What kind of mix-up? I ask, my voice carefully neutral. Some administrative error with the restaurant contract. Their payment got sent to the wrong account or something. My rent is due tomorrow, and my landlord is being really strict about late fees. Could you maybe... How much? Just $800. I know it sounds like a lot, but the payment will be sorted out by Friday, and I can transfer everything back to you immediately. $800. On top of the nearly $5,000 she already owes me. To cover lies that are unraveling in real time. To fund a lifestyle built on systematic deception and potential federal crimes. Madison, I say slowly, I just got an interesting email from Cascade Creative Solutions. The silence on the other end is deafening. I can explain, she says finally. It's not what it looks like. What does it look like, Madison? Another pause. When she speaks again, her voice has changed. The panic is gone, replaced by something harder. Something calculating. Look, every freelancer uses creative accounting. It's how the business works. You wouldn't understand because you've got your safe little corporate job, but those of us in creative fields have to be resourceful. Creative accounting, resourceful. She's reframing fraud as entrepreneurial flexibility, trying to make me feel naive for not understanding the realities of her industry. Madison, they're talking about involving their legal department. It's a misunderstanding. These big companies make administrative errors all the time. By next week, this will all be cleared up, and you'll see that I was right. She's doubling down, adding new lies to cover the old ones, building elaborate explanations for evidence she doesn't know I possess. Watching the performance from the other side, seeing how smoothly she pivots between stories, is both fascinating and horrifying. I need to think about this, I say. Alice, please, I'm your sister. I would never do anything to hurt you. You know that, right? The question hangs in the air between us. Do I know that? Did I ever really know that? Or have I been operating on faith and nostalgia while she's been operating on calculation and strategy? I'll call you back, I say, and hang up before she can respond. Then you move out by the end of the month, and we go our separate ways. I sell the house, you find somewhere else to live, and we pretend we're not related. Elena, you can't mean that, Mom whispered. I absolutely mean it. I'm 28 years old, Mom. I've built a successful business. I own multiple properties. I have a life that doesn't revolve around this family's dysfunction. I don't need you anymore. The question is whether you're willing to do what it takes to have me want you. Madison was crying again, but this time she wasn't trying to hide it or make it look graceful. These were ugly, desperate tears. How long do we have to decide? She asked. 24 hours. Elena, these are big decisions. Dad, you've had 25 years to make different decisions. 24 hours is more time than you gave me when you decided Madison could have my room, my college fund, and my boyfriend. I walked to my office door and opened it. Carol will validate your parking. I'll expect your answer by 5 p.m. tomorrow. They filed out slowly, each of them looking back as if they wanted to say something more. But there was nothing left to say. The terms were clear, the choice was theirs, and for the first time in my life I held all the cards. After they left, I stood at my window watching the afternoon sun reflect off the lake. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica in Austin. How did the big family confrontation go? I typed back, I think I just gave them the ultimatum that will either save our relationship or end it forever. And how do you feel about that? I thought about it for a moment before responding. For the first time in 25 years, I feel like I'm in control of my own story. The 24 hours that followed were the longest of my life, not because I was anxious about their decision, but because I was surprised to discover I genuinely didn't care what they chose. For 25 years, my emotional well-being had been tied to my family's approval. Now, sitting in my office the next morning, I realized that their acceptance or rejection would affect my life practically, but not emotionally. I was free. The realization hit me while I was reviewing architectural plans for a new development project in Milwaukee. Carol buzzed my intercom to remind me about a conference call with investors, and I suddenly understood that this, my work, my achievements, my independent life, was real in a way that family dinners and holiday obligations had never been. My phone has been buzzing constantly since yesterday's meeting. Messages from extended family members who'd apparently been brought into the crisis. Friends of Madison's asking if the engagement party was still happening. Even a few business contacts who'd somehow heard rumors about family drama involving my real estate holdings. I ignored them all and focused on work. At 2 p.m., Marcus Thompson called with an update I'd been expecting. Elena, I just got off the phone with your parents' attorney. They hired Patricia Kelman from Kelman & Associates. Good choice. She specializes in real estate disputes. She wants to meet with me to discuss potential alternatives to your terms. What kind of alternatives? She's exploring whether there are any legal grounds to challenge the eviction. She's also looking into whether they might have any claim to the property based on their rental payments and maintenance investments over the past 3 years. I leaned back in my chair, unsurprised but mildly disappointed. They're trying to find a way around accepting responsibility. It looks that way. But Elena, I reviewed everything again last night after your family left. Legally, they don't have a leg to stand on. The foreclosure was legitimate, your purchase was above board, and their rental agreement explicitly states they have no ownership rights. What did you tell Ms. Kelman? that I'd be happy to meet with her, but that the legal situation is straightforward. If they want to challenge the eviction, we'll see them in court. If they want to negotiate, they need to work within the terms you've already established. Good. Let me know what she says. After I hung up, I found myself thinking about a conversation I'd had with David Chen, my mentor, about 6 months earlier. We'd been discussing a particularly difficult negotiation with a property owner who was trying to back out of a signed contract. Elena, he'd said, in business and in life, you'll encounter people who want to renegotiate every deal once they realize they're not getting everything they want. The key is knowing when to stand firm and when to compromise. But never compromise on your core principles, and never let someone else's desperation become your emergency. At the time, I thought he was talking about business. Now I understood he'd been preparing me for this moment. At 4:15 p.m., Carol knocked on my office door. Elena, your family is here, all 3 of them, plus a man I don't recognize. Send them up. They walked into my office looking like they'd aged years in the past 24 hours. Dad's suit was wrinkled, Mom's hair was disheveled, and Madison looked like she hadn't slept. The man with them was tall, distinguished, wearing an expensive suit, undoubtedly Ryan. This was the first time I'd seen him since our breakup, and I was struck by how ordinary he looked. For months after we'd broken up, I'd built him up in my memory as this devastating loss, this perfect man who'd chosen my sister over me. Now, seeing him in my office, I realized he was just another average guy in a nice suit with mediocre ambition and flexible morals. Elena, Dad said, this is Ryan Morrison, Madison's fiancé. Ryan stepped forward with his hand extended. Elena, it's good to finally meet you in a professional context. I've heard so much about your business success. I didn't take his hand. Ryan, this isn't a business meeting. This is a family meeting about family consequences for family choices. You're not family. He dropped his hand, looking uncomfortable. I just thought, given that the decision affects Madison and me, the decision affects Madison. What Madison chooses to do about that affects you. There's a difference. Madison stepped forward. Elena, Ryan is part of this family now. We're getting married. No, Madison, Ryan is someone you're dating who happens to live in my house without permission. We established yesterday that was going to change. The room fell silent. Ryan looked between Madison and me as if he was trying to understand a conversation happening in a foreign language. Elena, Mom said quietly, we've spent the day discussing your terms. We'd like to propose some modifications. I'm listening, but I'm not negotiating. Dad pulled out a folder. We accept the family therapy requirement. We think that's actually a good idea. Okay. We accept that Madison needs to find full-time employment. She's already scheduled 3 job interviews for next week. I looked at Madison, who nodded reluctantly. We accept that we need to pay market rate rent if we want to stay in the house. And we'd like to discuss a payment plan for getting to that amount. Moving from $1,800 to $4,200 immediately would be financially impossible. What are you proposing? A 6-month graduated increase. Start at $2,500 next month, $3,000 the month after, and so on until we reach $4,200. I considered this. It was actually reasonable, and it showed they were taking the financial reality seriously. That's acceptable. What else? We'd like to discuss the engagement party. There's nothing to discuss. It doesn't happen in my house. Ryan spoke up. Elena, what if we move the party to a different location? Madison's already paid deposits. Ryan, I don't care where you have your party. I care that you don't have it in my house. But the costs, Madison started. Madison, 6 months ago you spent $800 on a purse without thinking twice about it. Last month you spent $1,200 on a weekend trip to Nashville. You can figure out how to handle some lost deposits. She flinched, but nodded. What about the public acknowledgement? Mom asked. This was the sticking point, and we all knew it. You want us to tell people that we don't actually own the house we've been living in for 3 years? Dad said. That's asking us to publicly admit we've been misleading people? Dad, you haven't been misleading people. You've been lying to them, and to yourselves. Elena, please understand how embarrassing this would be, Madison pleaded. Everyone thinks we're this successful family with this beautiful house. Finding out that we lost it to foreclosure and that my sister had to buy it to keep us from being homeless. would be telling the truth. But it would ruin our reputation in the community. Dad's business relationships, my social connections, Mom's standing at the country club. Madison, your reputation was built on a lie. If telling the truth ruins it, then it wasn't much of a reputation to begin with. Ryan cleared his throat. Elena, I understand you're angry, and you have every right to be. But surely there's a way to handle this that doesn't destroy everyone's social standing. I turned to look at him directly for the first time since he'd entered my office. Ryan, let me explain something to you. For the past 3 years, you've been benefiting from my financial support without knowing it. You've been living in a house I own, sleeping in a bed I'm paying for, using utilities I'm subsidizing. And during that time, you've been dating and now planning to marry the sister of the woman you dated for 4 years. Elena, I'm not finished. You want to talk about destroying reputations? You destroyed mine when you started dating Madison 3 weeks after our breakup. You want to talk about social standing? You damaged mine when you told people at that restaurant that I was more ambitious than realistic. So forgive me if I'm not particularly concerned about protecting yours. The room went silent again. Ryan looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. Elena, Dad said finally, what if we agreed to tell people privately when asked directly but didn't make any kind of public announcement? What people? Close friends, family members, business associates who might ask. I considered this. It wasn't exactly what I'd demanded, but it was movement toward honesty. And Madison's engagement party? We'll cancel it, Madison said, her voice barely above a whisper. We'll eat the deposits and tell people there was a family emergency. There was a family emergency, I said. The emergency was that you finally had to face consequences for your choices. Elena, Mom said, if we agree to all of this, the rent increases, the job requirement, the therapy, the honesty about the house, canceling the party, can we stay? Can we try to be a real family? I looked around the room at these people who shared my DNA but had never really known me. Dad, trying to maintain dignity while admitting failure. Mom, finally understanding the cost of her choices. Madison, learning that her charm and tears couldn't fix everything. And Ryan, realizing that his casual cruelty toward me had consequences he'd never anticipated. You can stay, I said finally. We can try. But understand something. This isn't about forgiveness. This isn't about going back to the way things were. This is about starting over with a foundation of honesty instead of lies. They all nodded, even Ryan. And Ryan, I added, you still can't live in the house. That condition isn't negotiable. Madison opened her mouth to protest, but Ryan put his hand on her arm. It's okay, Madison, I understand. I'll find my own place. It was the first decent thing I'd heard him say in years. As they prepared to leave, Dad turned back to me. Elena, I want you to know that I'm proud of what you've accomplished. Not just the business success, but the way you've handled this situation. You could have destroyed us, and instead you're giving us a chance to earn our way back into your life. Don't thank me yet, Dad. The hard part starts now. 6 months later, I stood in my kitchen making coffee on a Saturday morning when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Dad, something that still felt strange after years of minimal contact. Elena, good morning. I hope I'm not calling too early. It's fine, Dad. What's up? I wanted to let you know that Madison got the promotion at Brennan Marketing. She's now their junior account executive. I smiled despite myself. Madison had started as a receptionist at the mid-sized marketing firm after finally accepting that her communications degree and social media skills weren't enough to land a management position right away. Watching her work her way up through actual merit had been surprisingly satisfying. That's great news. How's she handling the increased responsibility? Better than I expected, honestly. She's working 50-hour weeks, learning about client management, and she seems focused in a way she never was before. This was the new normal weekly check-ins, where my parents actually updated me on substantive developments in their lives, and I shared real information about mine. It felt artificial sometimes, like we were all reading from a script about how functional families communicate, but it was progress. How are things with Ryan? I asked. Dad sighed. That's actually the other reason I'm calling. They broke up last week. I set down my coffee mug. What happened? Ryan couldn't handle the changes. He kept complaining about Madison working so much, about not being able to live together, about how different she'd become since she started taking responsibility for her own life. I wasn't surprised. Ryan had always been attracted to Madison, who needed rescuing, who made him feel important and successful by comparison. A Madison who worked full-time, paid her own bills, and didn't have unlimited time for his needs wouldn't have held the same appeal. How was she handling it? Better than I would have expected 6 months ago. She cried for a day, then went to work and threw herself into a new client presentation. She told your mother that she realized she'd rather be alone than with someone who didn't want her to grow. This was perhaps the most encouraging news I'd heard in months. The Madison I'd grown up with would have fallen apart completely, would have quit her job, would have expected the family to rally around her and fix everything. Dad, I'm proud of her. So am I. Elena, I want you to know that the family therapy has been eye-opening. Dr. Henricks doesn't let us get away with anything. Dr. Sarah Henricks was the family therapist I'd insisted they find, a no-nonsense clinical psychologist who specialized in family dysfunction and boundary issues. I'd met with her individually twice to give her context about our family dynamics before the group sessions began. What kinds of things is she making you face? Everything. The favoritism, the assumptions about your capabilities, the way we used you as a safety net while treating Madison as the priority. She made us write out a timeline of major family decisions over the past 10 years and analyze how they affected both you and Madison. I'd actually seen that timeline during one of our joint sessions. Laid out on paper, the pattern of preferential treatment was so obvious and systematic that even Madison had been shocked. She also made us explore why we assumed you didn't need the same emotional support that Madison did. That was a difficult conversation. What did you discover? That we confused your competence with invulnerability. That we took your achievements for granted because they came easily to you, while we celebrated Madison's because they required more effort from her. And that we never asked what you actually needed from us because we assumed you didn't need anything. It was the most insightful thing I'd ever heard my father say about our family dynamics. Dr. Henricks calls it parentification, he continued, where we treated you like another adult in the family instead of like our daughter who deserved protection and support. How do you feel about that analysis? Ashamed, and grateful that you're giving us a chance to do better. After we hung up, I found myself thinking about the conversation I'd had with Jessica the week before. She'd flown in from Austin to discuss expanding our operations into Colorado, and we'd ended up talking about my family situation over dinner. You know what's interesting? She'd said, twirling pasta around her fork. 6 months ago, you were consumed with anger about how they treated you. Now you seem peaceful about it. I think I finally understand the difference between justice and revenge, I replied. Revenge would have been destroying them because I could. Justice was creating consequences that forced them to confront reality. And what's the result? The result is that for the first time in my life, my relationships with them are based on honesty instead of obligation. It was true. The family dinners we had now, once a month, scheduled in advance, with clear expectations about conversation topics, were more genuine than any we'd had when I was growing up. Mom asked detailed questions about my business projects. Dad sought my advice on financial planning. Madison shared actual problems from her work life and listened to my suggestions. The house itself had become a different place. Madison had moved out 3 months earlier, using her savings to rent a small apartment closer to her job. Mom had redecorated what used to be Madison's room as a home office, where she managed the household finances with spreadsheets and budgets instead of optimistic assumptions. Dad had turned the basement into a workshop where he'd started building furniture, a hobby he'd abandoned 20 years earlier when business consumed all his time. They were learning to live within their means, to find satisfaction in earned achievements rather than inherited advantages, to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than comfortable assumptions. My own life had changed too, in ways I hadn't expected. Removing the constant undercurrent of family resentment had freed up emotional energy I'd been using to manage anger and disappointment. My business had grown even more rapidly, partly because I was more focused, but also because I'd started taking bigger risks and pursuing more ambitious projects. 3 months earlier, I'd purchased a historic hotel in downtown Milwaukee that I was converting into luxury condominiums. It was the kind of complex, high-profile project I'd always wanted to tackle but had been too cautious to attempt. Now, without the emotional drain of family dysfunction, I felt capable of handling any challenge. I'd also started dating someone, Dr. Marcus Reed, an architect I'd met through the hotel renovation project. He was smart, ambitious, and genuinely interested in my work. More importantly, he understood that my success wasn't something that needed to be managed or diminished to make room for his ego. Our first real conversation had been about sustainable building practices, and he'd listened to my ideas about integrating green technology into historic renovations with the kind of focused attention I'd never received from Ryan. When I'd mentioned the family situation during our third date, he'd asked thoughtful questions and offered perspective without trying to fix anything. "It sounds like you handled a difficult situation with remarkable maturity," he'd said. "A lot of people would have either cut ties completely or enabled the dysfunction indefinitely. Finding a middle path that creates accountability while preserving the possibility of relationship, that takes wisdom." It was the kind of response that made me realize how much I'd lowered my expectations in previous relationships. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. I wasn't expecting anyone, but when I opened the door, Madison was standing on my porch holding a bottle of wine and looking nervous. "Hi," she said. "I know we don't have dinner plans until next week, but I wanted to talk to you about something." "Come in. Is everything okay?" She followed me to the living room, setting the wine on the coffee table. "Everything's fine. Better than fine, actually. I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For forcing me to grow up." I studied her face. 6 months of full-time work, financial independence, and genuine accountability had changed her. She looked older, more serious, but also more confident in a way that seemed earned rather than inherited. "Madison, you don't need to thank me, you did the work. But you created the circumstances that made the work necessary. Elena, I spent 25 years thinking that things just worked out for me because that's how life was supposed to be. I thought I was lucky or charming or blessed. I never understood that you and Mom and Dad were constantly arranging things to make my life easier." She picked up the wine bottle, then set it down again without opening it. Breaking up with Ryan was the hardest thing I've ever done, but also the most necessary. He wanted me to be the person I was 6 months ago. Someone who didn't have to work for anything, who could focus all her attention on making him feel important. When I started setting boundaries about my time and energy, he couldn't handle it. How do you feel about that? Sad, but not devastated. For the first time in my life, I chose my own growth over someone else's comfort. It felt powerful. I smiled. It is powerful. Elena, I have something else to tell you. I've been saving money from my job, and I want to start paying you back for all the years you subsidized our housing costs. Madison, that's not necessary. Yes, it is. Dr. Henricks helped me calculate how much money you spent supporting us without us even knowing it. It's going to take me years to pay it back, but I want to try. Not because you're demanding it, but because it's the right thing to do. She pulled out an envelope from her purse. "This is $500. It's not much, but it's a start." I looked at the envelope for a long moment before taking it. The money itself didn't matter. It was a tiny fraction of what I'd spent over the years. But the gesture mattered enormously. "Thank you, Madison. This means more than you know." "Elena, I have one more question, and I want you to be completely honest." "Okay. Do you think we can ever be real sisters? Not just people who share parents and go through the motions of family relationships, but actual sisters who care about each other and support each other?" I thought about the question seriously. 6 months ago, I would have said no without hesitation. The damage felt too extensive. The patterns too entrenched, the hurt too deep. But sitting in my living room with this version of Madison, employed, independent, self-aware, taking responsibility for her choices, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: hope. "Pullers? I think we can try," I said finally. "But it's going to require continuing to be honest with each other, even when it's uncomfortable. It's going to require you to keep growing, and me to keep letting go of old resentments. And it's going to require both of us to build something new, instead of trying to fix something that was never quite right." Madison nodded, her eyes bright with tears that looked nothing like the manipulative crying I remembered from our childhood. "I'd like that," she said. I'd like to try to be the sister you deserved all along." As I watched her wipe her eyes and compose herself, I realized that the best revenge hadn't been making them face consequences for their choices. The best revenge had been creating space for all of us to become better people than we'd been before. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is refuse to be a victim of your circumstances and instead become the architect of your own life. Sometimes justice looks like boundaries, accountability, and the patient work of building something healthy from the ruins of something broken. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, the people who hurt you are willing to do the work required to earn their way back into your life. 6 months ago, I'd thought I was punishing my family. Now I understood I'd been saving us all. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.